Welcome to another edition of the Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig Lyndall. He's Andrew Schnitkey. How's it going, Andrew?
Going pretty good. Happy to be here again.
Yeah, so this was another week that was kind of dominated in our private lives by Pearl Jam, and that's going to drive the conversation, but I promise this is not really a Pearl Jam conversation. We're going to talk about concert tickets, specifically the price of concert tickets and ticket lotteries. So I guess we should start with Pearl Jam. They're going on a national tour. I can't call it a nationwide tour because it seems to be hyper located in places that Pearl Jam likes and places with ballparks. So, but yeah, they're going to play Wrigley. They're going to play Fenway. They're playing Seattle, MSG, not a baseball park, but Madison Square Garden. Right. And the 10 Club, which is their fan club, has kind of a lottery system so that you can buy tickets at face value. You and I both entered the lottery. I seem to have been the only one to score. I scored a couple of tickets to one of the dates. You did not, which is very disappointing. But meanwhile, it was also the opportunity to buy 2 tickets for $350 in my case. Not exactly a fan club bargain. Except that's just kind of where ticket prices have gone to. So I guess we should start with the concept of the fan lottery, and we can get into the general admission lottery in a little bit. But just from your perspective, you've been a 10 Club member for a very long time. You've seen Pearl Jam a number of times over the years, and you're kind of left holding the bag this time.
I should have grabbed before we started the episode. I actually still have my ticket from 1996, the first time I saw Pearl Jam, which was in Toledo at Savage Hall, which is where the Toledo Rockets play basketball. And I'm sure most people probably have never been there, but it is a tiny, tiny little arena. And I actually just went to a basketball game there a few weeks ago, Toledo and Bowling Green. And I was looking around and just thinking back and being like, man, I cannot believe Pearl Jam in 1996, mind you, when they were still one of the biggest bands in the world, played there. And obviously, the reason they played there was because that was when they were involved in the lawsuit against Ticketmaster. And so they tried to do a tour without Ticketmaster, and it was a complete shit show. They were playing non-Ticketmaster venues, which were usually smaller venues, and they were trying to use antiquated phone systems for people to call in to try and get tickets. It was really a mess. But back in
96, we weren't in the full-on online ticketing era. There used to be physical lines that I remember. Giant Eagle, the grocery store chain, used to have Ticketmaster windows, and if you really wanted to get tickets for certain things, you had to dial, or you had to show up and hope that the terminal that you were at had somebody with really fast fingers.
In 2000, I was a student at Ohio State, and they were coming to Columbus back when we had Polaris Amphitheater here. And at that time, though, you could buy tickets from any walk-up Ticketmaster venue. And the Schottenstein Center, where the Buckeyes play basketball, was a full Ticketmaster venue. So I just went over to Schottenstein Center, walked in there, and stood in line. There wasn't that many people there, and got tickets for that one. But go back to 96. You actually had to send in a postcard, so that they sent out postcards to all the fan club members and said, "Hey, if you want to request tickets, just fill out this postcard and which show you want to attend." And I'm pretty sure you could only pick one. So my buddy and we each sent in, and this was my first time getting shut out. I got shut out of that one. I didn't get tickets for the Toledo one, but my buddy did, thankfully, and so we were able to go. But I wish I could grab that ticket. I think it was $20. I'm almost positive it was $20. I think the public sales were more expensive than that, but the fan club was cheaper at that time than the general admission. Uh,
Well,
and
and it should be. You're paying an annual fee to be part of
right,
the club. In those days, the club came with some benefits like the free T-shirt and the Christmas
Christmas
single.
single, yeah. Yeah, and then physical newsletter we would get like that. There were some perks to being in the fan club,
Yeah,
but
it was like having a Pearl Jam zine.
yes, yep, and it was cool. It was always cool. I had like, I think Jeff was heavily involved in designing a lot of those. They usually had like a lot of cool artwork in it and stuff. But you know, people get busy, priorities change, all that stuff. It just became a thing where they started to get a little bit more, straightforward. You could tell the band wasn't as involved. I think the 10 Club Inc. took over a little bit.
10 Club
And
LLC, very specifically.
LLC.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so today, we don't get, there's no Christmas singles, there's no physical newsletters. They do still do email newsletters, but they're really stripped down. There's no t-shirt unless you want to buy one. You can buy a t-shirt if you want. Essentially you get two things for paying I think it's $40 a year. You get a free bootleg, and a digital download of a bootleg, and access to tickets. And the access to tickets is really the main thing driving me at this point in continuing to pay for that. And through the years, they've done a lot of different kinds of systems trying to figure out, like, it used to be they've done priority based on seniority, so how long you've been in the 10 Club, which selfishly I wish they still had because I've been a member since 95. But people didn't like that. Then they did where you could only request one show, and people didn't like that. And it slowly evolved to the point where this year it was just a free-for-all. You just, however many tickets you want, give them your credit card info, and you're going to get charged for all of them. If you put in every single show, and you put it, and you got every single show, your credit card was going to take a massive hit for that. So I did Seattle, which has always been a dream of mine, to see Pearl Jam in Seattle. I did that. I did Chicago. And, it sucks. I got shut out. I didn't get tickets, and, it really put a sour taste in my mouth because, I'm not mad at the fans for being excited, obviously, like, who did get tickets, but, I go to the message board, I look at Twitter, and I'm seeing people posting, "Oh yeah, I got general admission for 4 shows, and then I've got seats for 2 other shows." And I'm just sitting here like, man, I can't even go to one show.
How does
And
one fan get 5 shows or 4 shows or even 3
yeah,
shows and other fans get 0?
it just
It's
didn't. To me,
That's
this
not a
is
good
not a
system.
good system. And predictably, guess what? The message board erupted in flame wars between fans who didn't get it, who have sour grapes. It's sour grapes. Like, if a lot of those fans who didn't get tickets, if they did get them, they'd probably have been on the other side. But then you've got the fans who got their tickets say, "Well, sorry, life isn't fair," and it's like, and I'm like, all these fans are fighting with each other, and I'm like, you guys realize, like, the fans are not the bad guys here. Nobody did anything
Same
wrong.
team, man. Same
Yeah,
team.
we all want to see Pearl Jam live, and we're all in the fan club primarily for that reason. And it
Well,
was
and you and
just,
I were both living and dying, refreshing our email,
oh
and we
yeah,
both were completely shut out. And then it must have been the absolute very last possible moment I got that email, and I almost felt bad sending. I was like, oh well, hey, I did get a pair of tickets to one
yeah,
show in Boston.
yeah, and it is
But I
what it
should have
is. But
just been happy. But
exactly, and that's
because
the
of
thing. It's
the
even then
situation.
you couldn't just be like, oh hell yeah, dude, I got tickets. Like obviously, I mean, I was genuinely happy for you, but like, yeah, I saw that when you sent that text, I was like, sweet, like, cool. Like, everybody else got tickets that I know. Like, I had a couple other people I was texting with, who I know that are fan club members who got tickets to shows they wanted, and I'm just like, man, this kind of sucks. But you know, I at the end of the day, like I said, like the real bad guy here is the system itself. And to some degree, I can be sympathetic to Pearl Jam. Like when you're that popular of a band and you still have that many fans who are so rabid, you know, I think Pearl Jam fans are notoriously, you know, pretty rabid. They don't have a huge fan base like they used to, but the ones who have stuck around are fiercely loyal and want to see this band. Like I said, literally, you see people 5, 6, 7, 8 shows, you know. But you know, it's a hard system to figure out. Like, well, how are we going to figure out how to get everybody tickets? And I think my idea is still.
Well, the
Oh,
other
you
the
go
other
ahead.
part of it is population dynamics, and I get into this conversation a lot with my friends who are really into kind of retro video games, and that whole market has exploded too because it's people our age. You and I are in our 40s now, and most Pearl Jam fans are kind of in that same ballpark. We might be kind of the midpoint. You know, there's some Pearl Jam
Yeah.
fans who are a little bit younger than we are. There are plenty who are a little bit older than we are, but
Hmm.
we are at that time of life where we're not completely poor in our 20s.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that every Pearl Jam fan is rich. It's just to say that in terms of being established in the economy, Pearl
Yeah.
Jam fans are established in the economy now, and they can make
Yep.
adult decisions involving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. I mean, in my case, I won tickets to Boston, and I'm complaining a little bit about the cost, $350 for 2 tickets.
Yeah.
But the travel and the hotel and all that stuff is gonna put us well over $1,000.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, by the time I eat at a restaurant twice, there's another two
Yeah.
hundred dollars in
Without a
Boston.
doubt.
Um,
And
and
yeah,
yeah,
and
if I drink a glass of bourbon in Boston, that's going to be $15, $20. I don't even
absolutely,
know.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's where, like, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Because, like I said, I mentioned earlier, it's always been a dream of mine to go see Pearl Jam in their hometown, you know, go see them in Seattle. And this was honestly like the first time in my life where it fell at a right time of the year and financially, I can afford to go out and fly out to Seattle and see them. And so I was
might
excited
cost you
for it.
another vacation, but you could do it.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, so it was just really and like the real painful part of it too was the way they did this, people realized pretty quickly that the notifications of people who got tickets were going out city by city. And so I'm just sitting there furiously refreshing the message board, seeing. And so, you know, Sacramento, we saw Vancouver, LA was going. The Indianapolis show went pretty early.
Well, the
Baltimore went
Indianapolis
pretty
show was actually a
early.
reschedule from last
Uh,
year. But yeah,
Correct. And you know, so I'm just sitting there watching, and then I see Seattle won. I see the first person get Seattle night one. I'm like, all right, here we go. You know, and that's what. Not only am I refreshing my email, I'm actually refreshing my credit card account to see if that charge hits me because you know, I knew my card would get charged, and then
when
time
I
starts
actually use
ticking,
the
and
Apple Card, and so I,
that's
I
what I
get
did too.
notifications right at the top of my iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm sitting there watching all this stuff and you see, and then it's Seattle night two. It's like, all right, come on, here we go. Let's go. And, you know, you're just waiting. And as you just start to see more and more people say they got it, it's like, oh, this is starting not to feel very good. And then finally, it was the next show. I don't even remember what the next city was because I think I blacked out. Where I was just like, "Oh my god!" Like I'm not getting tickets.
The
And
blind rage.
yeah, and then the same thing was then Chicago comes around and exact same thing. And I thought for sure I was like, as huge as Wrigley is, I was like, there's got to be tons of room. Like I don't think I'm going to get shut out of Wrigley. Well, I did. So
Well,
so yeah,
and
so
Fenway Park is not that big. I mean, it's big because it's a baseball stadium, but it's also not the hugest baseball stadium in America.
yeah,
Um, so I felt like by the time I got that email and you and I had kind of been through a whole day of hitting refresh, or it felt like a whole day. It was probably actually just a few hours, but I really truly did feel like I won the lottery. But that's tough. That's tough. And the reason why we're bringing this up, like, I know we could continue to talk about Pearl Jam and the dynamics around Pearl Jam, but there have been thousands and hundreds of thousands of families, maybe millions of fans who've been dealing with this on the Taylor Swift front. I
Hmm.
don't think her fan club has any special access at all. Everybody's into the cattle line of the lottery for Ticketmaster. And of course, early on, Ticketmaster had trouble with crashes and all kinds of things going on, and those tickets are going for thousands and thousands of dollars a piece. And yeah,
I
some
think,
Pearl Jam tickets are going to go for $1,500 or $2,000 by the time this
you know,
tour's all set up and ready to go. But the reason why we bring this up is it's a universal problem. And the funflation, some news outlets have called it,
yeah,
but specifically the ticket inflation for live music between Beyonce, Taylor Swift, name an artist, has been bananas since the pandemic kind of ended in terms of people going out to see shows again. The festivals have been crazy. Um, but I'm wondering if maybe we haven't reached a peak.
yeah. I'm going to circle back to something too. Like even like the Taylor Swift thing. I don't even know, was that even a lottery, or was that just everybody was refreshing Ticketmaster and you had
Yeah,
this,
that.
or the phone trying to get through the phones. I think it
Yeah,
was
it's
more of
like
that
it's like one of those
system.
things where you log into the site at 11:59 and at 12 you get a
Yeah,
number, and oh, I'm
yeah,
133,475. I don't think I'm going to get tickets,
yeah. And that's
or
not a great system either. And that's a system again that is just ripe for people who are just trying to buy tickets to sell them, too. And that's another problem that we have with the with like, there's not a perfect system, I don't think, but it is becoming a problem where for these larger established artists, it's very hard for fans to get tickets to the shows, and it's just not. Like, some people would say, well, just play more shows, like, play more nights in every city, but that's not always feasible because, for one thing, availability. Like, you can't always count on an arena being available 4 nights in a row, or 4 out of 5 nights.
Well, let's
Which,
go ahead and bring it back to Pearl Jam and have that conversation, because that's absolutely a possibility for Pearl Jam. They are being
yeah,
stingy. They skipped the entire state of Ohio. They're not playing
again,
St. Louis. They're not playing. There's so many major markets that they've played in the past that they're just completely skipping, and it's their prerogative. But they're also kind of creating a lot of the problem.
yeah,
They're creating a pinch point in
hmm,
Chicago, in Seattle, in Boston, and in New York City, the biggest, and Philly, the biggest markets in the world. And they're causing any of their fans who don't live in those markets to not only have to get lucky to get tickets, but then have to travel and pay all the
yeah, pay a
lodging and all
premium,
those other expenses.
yeah. And so, you know, whether any of these artists do any kind of fan club exclusive, I almost wonder if, like, we really are getting to the point that, like, you almost have to wonder, like, is a better system to limit, one night. Um, but I don't even necessarily want the bands to have to do that either, though, because I don't know, like,
Yeah,
I don't have any great answers. There's people a lot smarter than me who can probably, like, come up with some better systems. Like, I certainly think, like, in Pearl Jam's case, I mean, I'll just use it for an example because it's fresh in our mind, but like they did for the Madison Square Garden shows, you could request both nights, but you were only going to get one night. They said you cannot get both nights through the fan club. Now, you can still go to the other show. You just have to
sure.
get tickets through general sale or the aftermarket. And I wish they would have done that with, and they certainly could have done that for Seattle, I feel like, too, because that's another huge demand place for them. Obviously, their hometown. Like, what's the harm in saying, you know what, we're going to limit? Because you as fans get one night. If you want to go to the other night, you still can, but you're going to have to go through the system just like everybody else. But the perk of being a fan club member, you're sure that you're going to get in one of those nights. And I just wish,
Or
now,
or a better chance.
I was just going to say a better chance, because I know tons of people got shut out of Madison Square Garden. Like, they did not have near enough tickets. And this is another problem that has been increasing, actually, is the corporate holds. The corporate sponsors get tickets, the giveaways that they have. So when you negotiate this agreement with all these venues, they have their own partners that they hold tickets for, and they're not going to give it to the artists to sell. And we've been seeing that actually increase, and we know this through, at least, and again, I know we said this isn't just about Pearl Jam, but they're the ones that I follow the closest. Every year when they do it, they actually have, when you're signing up for the tickets, they show you the seating chart, and you can see where the reserve tickets are. And we've seen the reserve tickets increasing and the fan club tickets decreasing, or getting pushed to worse seating locations, which is a bit of a bummer too. And so that's just another factor that compounds this and makes it harder.
Well, let's talk about kind of the 10,000-foot view as well, because a lot of what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years, well, 3 years, is there was so much pent up demand from so many canceled shows and so many canceled tours during the pandemic, where I held Rage Against the Machine tickets for, I think, damn near 3 years before they finally played that tour. And I was lucky enough to go see them. I held on to my tickets and I went and saw them, and it was great. Um, but all that pent up demand has fueled these huge increases in ticket prices, especially on the secondary market. It's we've seen it most notably at Taylor Swift, and she's playing football stadiums, and still there's more demand than ever could be solved in terms of supply. But I wonder if we're not reaching the peak, because I've been a festival goer. I know you're not a festival goer, but I've been a festival goer over the last 7 or 8 years. And a friend of mine and I started with the Innings Festival in Tempe, Arizona. And we've been going to that one. And oddly enough, we went to that one because he and I had a pact that we were going to go see Pearl Jam. And the first one we went to was a time where Eddie Vedder played it solo. So we went out to Tempe, Arizona at the end of February, beginning of March. It coincides with the opening of spring training. It's a pretty cool festival. And we went to every single one other than the one that was canceled due to the pandemic, until this year. And we decided there was there's a bit of a lack of interest on behalf of my friends and the people that we used to go to this thing with this year. And so we're not going. It's in the next week and a half. And just out of curiosity, I went on the website this week, and the headliner this year is Red Hot Chili Peppers on night one, and then Hozier and a whole bunch of other bands on night two. And I went and I pretended like I was going to buy the VIP tickets that we normally buy for that festival, and they're still available. Last year, when it was Foo Fighters, obviously a different band, it was completely and utterly sold out by this point. There were no more tickets available. It sold out in a hurry. And so some of it might have to do with the difference between Red Hot Chili Peppers and Foo Fighters, but it also seems to me that it's probably an indicator that maybe we kind of hit that peak for demand. The people who had excess money and were desperate to see live music after the pandemic maybe have sated their needs a little bit, and they don't need to get out and see live music to the same degree that they did even 18 months ago, 12 months ago. So I don't know, that doesn't really equate to Taylor Swift or Pearl Jam, because I think there's always a supply problem as related to the demand. But I'm wondering with these festivals, if we haven't reached that peak and maybe conquered a lot of that demand, that pent up demand from the pandemic, when people were really needing live music and couldn't get it.
There's a lot more festivals now too. Like, it's really becoming a huge thing to have these one-off festivals, and we're seeing them pop up all the time. I just saw that they just announced a new one for punk, hardcore, ska. I forget that one. No Values. That's
I haven't heard that one.
That's out California. That's a new one, and I mean they've got lots of heavy hitters in those areas. But yeah,
Well,
the,
and they've really professionalized it too. So down in Louisville, Kentucky at the fairgrounds, they use that same location. They have the Bourbon and Beyond Festival, then a week
mm-hmm,
or a week and a half later, they've got the Louder Than Life Festival. Those are both
mm-hmm,
4-day festivals.
yep,
And they're changing the signage around the stage.
yeah,
I don't even think they're changing the booths. So like Jack Daniels is there and they stay there
yep.
for 2
Oh
weeks.
yeah.
And I mean, it makes a lot of
Sonic,
sense.
yeah, Sonic Temple here in Columbus. That's the same way. That's a 4 night
Is
festival
that at
too.
the old soccer
Yeah,
stadium?
the old Crew Stadium. Yep. So but the funny thing is you still though like I do think as these festivals become more ubiquitous, and I think as you mentioned, the funflation thing starts to sort of wane. People have gotten it out of their systems. I could see the festivals being over that peak, but certainly for large artists like well-known established touring acts, uh, as much as we lament the rising ticket prices, like it's clear it's not a detriment to the fans. Like you said, like there's still a supply problem. So, you know, if Pearl Jam was still selling tickets even for $50, the demand, I promise you, would be even higher than it already is. Like there are definitely Pearl Jam fans who could not afford to pay $185 for a ticket. So, and so as much as we wish the prices would go down, if anything, the market is saying, hey, you could actually charge more and maybe take care of some of this supply and demand inequity.
Well, and you and I have talked about this over the years, and I was a finance major. I'm a business guy, so I think about these things from a pricing standpoint. And I know there was a lot of criticism of Bruce Springsteen in the last year for some of the face value pricing he put on these
Yep.
tickets. But the idea is that if Bruce sells a ticket for $100 and then it gets traded 6 times by the secondary market and ends up going for 900, 1,000, $1,500. Why should that $1,400 spread? Why should that spread of money go to a bunch of ticket brokers,
Yep.
SeatGeek, StubHub, eBay, whatever? Like what
Yep.
that money belongs to Bruce. And that money, same with Pearl Jam or Taylor Swift. If Taylor Swift can get $1,500 a ticket, she deserves that money, not Ticketmaster
Yep.
resellers.
Yep.
All these people who profit off. So I had 4 tickets to see the Postal Service and Death Cab for Cutie on their 20th anniversary tour in Detroit, the Detroit area. And as it turned out, we couldn't make it. We just couldn't go. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't really trying to flip the tickets, but when I went to sell them on StubHub because we couldn't go, the recommended price, the midpoint was a full $80 a ticket more than I paid for them. So I could have sold them for exactly the amount above face value that after fees would have given me what I paid for them. But as it turned out, I think I made $150 on those 4 tickets.
Yep.
And I, I don't feel too bad about it. I wasn't trying to make money off the tickets. I would
Right.
have rather gone. It turned out I couldn't go. But
Yeah.
wouldn't that money be better served in Death Cab for Cutie's hands and the Postal Service's hands than mine?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. It's like people are demonstrating that, as much as we hate the cost of tickets, people are demonstrating that it is not prohibitive. Like it's just not there, and they are willing to go to the aftermarket and pay these crazy costs. And it just goes to show, like you said, if people are willing to pay that much for a concert ticket, who should be getting that money? And you know, I've seen people make the argument. They're like, well, if they charge more, then the aftermarket is just going to charge more. Like, no, there's a breaking point where people just will not, will not pay that money, or at least not in large quantities. And it's just with the just sheer volume of tickets we see being sold in secondary markets. It's just, to me, it's just evident that that's a thriving area where people are making money. And, I'm not sitting here advocating, for ticket prices to go up. I'm just saying we're in a situation where there is a problem between supply and demand. And without a great way to, if we're not going to put in the work to figure out systems to evenly distribute tickets to fans, then you do have to question, what is the next step to fix that? Is it just to raise prices even more? And which I don't want to see that happen, but I just can't help but look at the way these markets work and just wonder, like, is that where we're headed with? Again, this is applies only really to these, like established bands that can play anything from like a medium venue up to the arenas. We're still not, you can still go to your, club shows and pay, less than $50 for a ticket. That's a different thing entirely. But for these well-established artists, it's just, I don't know what else they can do. Again, unless they're gonna figure out a system to evenly distribute.
No, and that's ultimately, not to be dickish about it, but that's the real solution. Uh, you need to pay attention to these smaller bands. You need to find yourself in smaller venues.
Yeah.
You can get up close and personal. You can meet the bands at the merch table. You can buy T-shirts directly from them.
Yeah.
And even with inflation hitting those venues too, it's like I just bought. I've got it up in front of me. I just bought 2 tickets. I love this band Microwave from Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing the Roxy in Lakewood here. It's the new venue connected to May Halls. It maybe holds 500 people. I don't know. I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I got 2 tickets for $79.32 after fees. So that's not cheap, by the way. $40 sounds like a lot for a club show to my old self.
Oh, yeah.
But still, compared to $350 plus travel expenses for Pearl Jam, I guarantee you I will have almost as much fun at that Microwave show seeing a band that I love at the Roxy in a small venue and maybe even getting a chance to meet them if I feel like it.
Yeah.
Then I will, staring at Eddie Vedder from 75 yards away.
Yeah, it's an entirely different experience for sure.
In Fenway Park.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so anyways, that's kind of the where my head's at with the tickets. Like it's hard for me right now to not let my sour grapes sort of blind me a little bit. I have grape colored goggles, as they would say, but I don't know. I was just very frustrated with the whole system. So
no, I totally get it. But to my point, it's like I was talking on Twitter about this week. For all my complaints about the big tours and talking about the festival that's not sold out, just the Roxy. I'm going to see Arm's Length and Saturdays at Your Place. I've got Spanish Love Songs tickets. I've got Microwave tickets. I'm going to see Los Campesinos.
Yeah.
All four of those shows, 2 tickets each, are probably a little bit less than what I'm paying for Pearl Jam. So music is still totally attainable. And you want to feel good about supporting an artist and feeling good about the ticket price that you're paying. You give it to a band that's loading all their own equipment into the van and trailer after the show.
Absolutely.
Maybe they have one roadie, maybe they have one person working the merch table, but these are the mom and pop businesses of the music business. The champagne problems of Pearl Jam and Taylor Swift and Beyonce are not the same. I was looking at Twitter. There's another band from Florida that I really love called Dikembe. I think you've listened to Dikembe a little bit.
Oh yeah.
They're out there trolling for couches and floors to sleep on at certain spots, and they're damn near 20 years in. So, it's feast or famine. I mean, I know that's a cliche, but that's kind of literally what it is.
Yeah. I wonder too, like, another thing that's interesting just in terms of like the popularity of rock music is, we don't see as many bands crossing that line anymore, like starting out in the clubs and then working their way to the arenas. Like, there's not a lot of like, younger rock bands, like pure rock bands that are selling out arenas. It's just,
Well, and even like when I went to Red Rocks last year to see Manchester Orchestra at Red Rocks, they were
mhm,
opening for Jimmy Eat World.
yeah,
So they had to group up with Jimmy Eat World in
yeah.
order to play Red Rocks. So it's not. It was awesome. It was a
They
cool
opened.
story.
They opened for Jimmy Eat World.
I think they called that thing a co-headlining tour, but I
Okay.
think
In
Manchester
my
Orchestra
mind, it seems
opened.
like Manchester Orchestra would be more popular. That's interesting.
That's such a phenomenon for guys like you and me. And I'm not trying to say we're special or anything, but like we've talked about this over the years where we listen to a band and in our minds, because of digital music technology and everything else, we're listening to them and they're in the same Spotify channel as the biggest rock bands in the world. And then you see like an Instagram video of them playing live in front of like 37 people.
Yeah.
And you're like, how in my world, this is like the biggest, an incredible band that should have thousands of fans wherever they go. And it's just not the case.
Yeah. So I do wonder though, like obviously, like pop music is always going to be, you'll never run out of pop artists able to fill arenas. But I'm legit kind of curious, like if there is a period where we're going to run out of. Trying to think of the delicate way to say this, like good rock bands that aren't like just sort of doing a generic like you know mass appeal sound, that can still.
Yeah. Will we ever run out of rock bands other than Imagine Dragons
Right.
level, that
You know.
crossover pop? And Imagine Dragons, like, I'm not going to take anything away from them. They're not my thing
Right.
personally, but my kids love them and
Yeah.
their music is catchy. And if my kids wanted to go see them, my oldest son went through a 21 Pilots phase.
Yeah, I was just
Like
gonna say
I'm
that's another one.
all all good. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm not here to hate it, even if it's not 100%
Right.
my deal.
I think about like even like one of the bigger phenomenons of the last couple of years has been a band like Turnstile, who a band like that should never be playing anything bigger than a club. Suddenly they have played arenas opening for bands. They're
Blink
close.
182.
They are close to being big enough to be able to headline that. They're not quite there yet, but they're doing those mid-sized venues. They'll sell those out no problem.
Well, and it
So
was shocking to me last summer when kind of a nostalgia rock band like Mudvayne had a headlining tour at Blossom Music Center, kind of that
yeah,
outdoor pavilion style thing. I don't know how the ticket sales were, but I was kind of surprised that they were able to headline a tour like that without grouping up with four other bands to help them do it, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So
We're seeing a lot of that group up,
oh
uh,
yeah,
grouping the, you know,
yeah,
grouping up in order to fill venues.
yep,
But that's not new. I remember at the end of my senior year of high school, right before I went to college, it was Counting Crows and the Wallflowers touring together.
yeah,
And I know
yeah,
that's like a funny blast from the past. And Counting Crows, the last time they came through town, they played the Roxino.
yeah,
So like that's
yeah.
that's who they are today, which is fine. Like whatever, they're still playing. And who's Bush touring with this summer? But they're playing. It's like Bush and Candlebox, and but
Yeah.
they're playing Nautica.
Is Jerry Cantrell on that?
Jerry
Allison?
Cantrell.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's who it is. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was Jerry or if it was Alice, but yeah,
So we are going to Nautica. It's going to be kind of a goof night, but we're going to go. we don't care as much about Bush as we do. My buddy is the hugest Candlebox fan in the world, and I love Jerry
First
Cantrell.
concert I ever saw was Candlebox at the Toledo Zoo Amphitheater.
Hot take. They kill live.
Oh God, yeah, they were awesome.
They're
They
so
were
good.
incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
don't even know.
Bush is really good live too.
Yeah, I don't know who's
Even though
in Candlebox anymore. Like,
it's just what Bush and Candlebox are basically the lead singer and hired guns. That's what it is.
Yeah, but still, like, yeah.
I mean, which is essentially a Jerry Cantrell tour as well.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, isn't it weird to be the age where these nostalgia tours kind of play to our sensibilities?
It is, like, it's you always kind of just wondered, like, growing up, like, what like classic rock was, like my dad's music, and when I started listening to Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, things like that, and like they're like, oh, those bands that are so old, but they're so good, but like, man, they're old. And now you realize, like, these bands we're talking about are like older than Zeppelin was when I was considering them old, so I don't know. It's just,
and meanwhile, the big announcement this year was in Cleveland anyway, and some other cities was Billy Joel and Rod Stewart together, and I think Billy Joel is great. You'll never hear me trash Billy Joel. I think Rod Stewart is great, undeniably great.
Great
but
singer.
Those dudes were on the oldies channel when we were growing up.
Yeah. Yep.
And like, that's the big announcement. What happened? Where's the next Billy Joel and the next Rod Stewart, and why aren't they headlining?
It's a really good question. Like, I'm trying to think of, like, who would even be a Billy Joel type today. Like, I don't even know. Like, I can't even come up with a single name. Like,
John Cicada.
Yeah. Like, I wonder, like, what, as we're seeing, like, Post Malone sort of, like, adapt and change and, like, settle into, like, the next phase of his career. Like, kind of curious, like, what his legacy will look like. That's somebody who obviously is not making, like, traditional rock music by any, or rock music period by any means.
MGK as well, Machine Gun Kelly.
Yeah, and so, but these are your sort of artists that I think people can take seriously from maybe not MGK so much, but certainly Post Malone people take seriously from, like,
and they should. Post Malone is phenomenally talented.
Yeah, and so that could maybe be something. His music I wouldn't compare to Billy Joel, but I mean, in terms of being this guy that, as he ages, if he wants to continue doing this, I could see where people are like, "Hey, Post Malone is coming. Like, let's go check out Post Malone."
Well, and I would compare him to Billy Joel just in terms of the crossover, where it was like
he can appeal
because he could definitely hit the adult contemporary. Like, some of his biggest hits could have been played on, if radio still existed in the way that it did when we were kids, it would have been on pop. It would have been on adult contemporary. It would have been on easy listening, even some of it, which is funny to say. But how many times did that happen where there was just the crossover artist in our day was like totally different than Post Malone, but Sheryl Crow was when she was at her youngest and at her peak, she was the alternative station. She could be played on country. She could be played on adult contemporary. There was like no state. There was no station that they couldn't be played on. Well, Shania Twain couldn't be played on the alternative stations, but everywhere else,
not so much the alternative, but yeah. I would say, Alanis Morissette, she could be played on a lot of different,
especially the second record.
Yeah, I was just say, as her career went on and she, like, diversified her sound a lot more.
But ironic was on every station. Across the board.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, there, those things do exist. Does Alanis still tour? Like,
she toured recently, yeah.
Did she? Okay, that's somebody I've not, like, really heard much from recently.
So that was one of my early live shows as a teenager when I was able to drive. I went a good friend of mine from high school. We weren't dating or anything, but I went with a girl, and my friend also went with a girl. We were just friends, and
Hmm.
we went and saw Alanis, and it was one of the best shows. That was when Taylor Hawkins was still her drummer,
Oh yeah,
and oh man, was she just electric live.
yeah.
For all the hits that came off that record, it sounded overly produced and kind of poppy on the record, but
Hmm.
when you saw it live and Taylor Hawkins was pounding the drums behind her,
Yep.
that band just killed. They added an extra swing to kind of to every
Hmm.
song. They rocked out. It
Hmm.
was just, it was a moment in time, man. I can't explain to people if you weren't there
Yeah.
just how electric she was live with that backing band.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I could always hear that element, even on Jagged Little Pill. Like you could hear that visceral, like alternative energy that was underneath it, and you could
And live,
definitely.
she went for it. She went for it with the vocals,
Oh
almost
yeah,
like a punk singer.
yeah,
Like she was overly produced and very within herself on the record,
hmm,
but she let it loose live.
yeah, yeah. Big fan.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how we got to Alanis Morissette, but here we are.
Yeah, I don't know either, but yeah.
All right, what's next on the topic list? Where are we going, Andrew?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit today about, when we first started the show, we said we wanted to talk about this through the lens of, 90s music, the music that we grew up on. And we've kind of hit on this a little bit just organically already, but I kind of wanted to touch on like, what is the role of 90s music today? You know, as we've seen, like the grunge bands, like we're down to Pearl Jam. Like Alice in Chains still exists to some degree, but I don't know the last time they toured. They haven't done an album in probably 4 years. I
They
think
get
their
lured
last
into
one
festivals
was.
from time to time.
Yeah, yeah, they'll do some festivals, but primarily Jerry's been doing a lot of solo stuff. So I don't know what their official status is, but like on the grunge side, like we're kind of running out of them. Mudhoney, they
Dude,
just
it's by the way, it's 2 years to the day that we lost Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees.
that's crazy. I didn't know that was today. Wow.
I
Um,
just saw it while we were talking.
yeah, but even beyond that, thinking about like Oasis,
Who I was never a big fan of, by the way.
one of my
I
absolute
like their big
favorite
hits.
bands, but Red Hot Chili Peppers, they're still kicking it. Smashing Pumpkins are still doing something. So I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit about like what do you think, sort of like how are these bands viewed today by the music population at large? Because it's been interesting to see the reaction of people to like the new Pearl Jam song and like trying to figure out like, what does Pearl Jam have in them? Do people still care if Red Hot Chili Peppers make a new album? Like we said, Smashing Pumpkins, they put out a new album last year, I think, or else 2 years ago. But like
It was last year.
nobody seemed to care about it. So first
You
of
and
all,
I
just
tried to listen to it.
yeah, it was not good. So I kind of want to pick your brain about like where you see 90s bands fitting in the role of music today, and then talking a little bit, certainly, your perspective with your kids, how they view that music versus compared to like how we viewed like our dad's music. And so when I say our dads, I mean of that age, not the specific bands that our parents listened to, but like the classic rock thing.
Yeah, so I think my kids view Pearl Jam and grunge and all the bands of the 90s kind of in the same way that you and I maybe looked at AC/DC.
Okay.
So I think Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and some of those bands, they sounded great and we loved them and we fell in love with them to some degree, some
Mm-hmm.
of us more than others.
Mm-hmm.
But it always felt like it was from a different era, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was a timelessness to AC/DC that it
It's true.
never felt like it lived in the 80s or it lived in the 70s or it felt like it could have lived in any era whatsoever. And I think because of technology, because of the quality of the recordings from the 90s, and because honestly, as much as you and I talk about the incremental differences of Andrew Watt's recording of Pearl Jam today,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really sound that much different than what was coming out in the 90s. That
Right.
music on Spotify being played in a playlist going track to track to track sounds just the same.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin does not. Led
Oh, yeah.
Zeppelin does sound antiquated. It does sound like even when you play one of those tracks, you can kind of hear the hiss of the
Mm-hmm.
recording before it comes on. Um, and I think Pink Floyd, the production is impeccable on that, but I think the style screams 70s a little bit more, even though it is somewhat timeless. But I think Alice in Chains, I think any of that stuff, I think it holds up and just fits right in, where I don't think people think about the time period it came from at all in a lot of cases. Now, when I get into a rhythm where I overplay some of those bands, I think my kids roll their eyes a little bit. You know, it's
Yeah.
I jokingly refer to it as aging butt rock
Right.
from time to time,
Yeah.
because from their perspective, it's not vital. It wasn't. It
Yeah.
wasn't their living and breathing moments. But man, you know, a couple months ago, or I don't know how long ago, I wrote about Purple by Stone Temple Pilots, and those tracks sound like they could have been released yesterday. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that people are picking that up, or Super Unknown sounds like it could have been recorded yesterday. I
Mm-hmm.
think the way kids today are picking those things up, specifically the ones who play an instrument, guitar, drums, whatever,
Yeah.
um, I think there's like a timelessness to 90s music that just couldn't have possibly existed for you and me, because we were making $17 or $18 choices at the record store.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think I think that's an interesting point that you brought up too, because when you watch any of these like YouTube videos of you know music fan here's Pearl Jam for the first time, these are all over YouTube. These reaction videos of young people discovering old music. And I don't even have to put it in quotes because it is old music now.
It
Um,
is.
but the comments they get, it's almost never like, wow, like this sounds old, whereas if we would have done that at our age, you're absolutely right. If we would have done a Led Zeppelin thing, we would have said, well, this definitely sounds like it's coming from the 70s. And so I do think that's,
Even something impeccable like Kashmir
yeah.
sounds a little bit dated. It sounds like a little bit of the moment.
Yeah, and that's you're probably right that it's primarily because of the technology and how that music was recorded and analog versus digital and all that. But yeah, like it's funny too because
Can
I
I interrupt for
think
one more second?
yeah.
Let me also point this out, because I think that, you know, where the 80s cock rock, the big hair
Mm-hmm.
stuff, I think Guns N' Roses will translate forever, but I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of those other bands have just gotten left behind completely.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could make a comparison, I think a lot of that new metal stuff, uh,
Yeah,
other than Korn, I don't think you're going to see a lot of kids going, "Oh yeah, I picked up this Stained record,
you're right.
and I love it forever and ever and ever." Um, so I think there's like a, if it was too much of a put on, and I always compared new metal to kind of that 80s cock rock, big hair, Poison type
That's a
stuff.
perfect analogy, really, because it's also
And
specific,
Poison and Motley Crue only play to people who were actually there. If you
right?
go to that Motley Crue show at Progressive Field later this year with Def Leppard,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to see a lot of young kids unless they were dragged there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very specific sound to that time period. I think also another interesting dynamic too, and this is maybe one thing that is perhaps similar, would be the when we would read about Led Zeppelin and people talked about how jarring it was when they first came out and it was so heavy. Everybody talked about how heavy Led Zeppelin was, and then we would listen to it post like Guns N' Roses, Metallica, like we
Or Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah, and we would
Don't tell
listen.
me about heavy.
Yeah, so we would listen to Led Zeppelin and be like, people thought this was heavy, and I do think,
Black Sabbath was the ultimate example. I was like, oh, I
yeah,
get it. It's slow and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
riffy.
yeah, and I
And I love it. By the way,
do.
I do love it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a little bit of a comparison to be made in the fact that I can see where somebody today would listen to Pearl Jam's 10 and have no concept of how that could have been revolutionary music. You know, how even verses, which kind of gets into a little bit more of a edgier sound than what 10 had. I even think like listening to that, people would be surprised at how aggressive Pearl Jam seemed in the early 90s. So that might be one comparison where that is a generational thing. Um, but I think that's a little bit of being when you're growing up, you can't help but be a prisoner of the moment and your context that you're growing up in. And so the music that you are exposed to sounds a certain way. And so when you hear something from a different era, even though it can hold up sonically, you might still stylistically not understand what that band meant at that time. And I wonder sometimes about that. Like, as I reflect on that, I always wonder, like, can even I, thinking about this now, really appreciate what Led Zeppelin must have meant to people when those, particularly their first four albums, which, were so revolutionary in that time period. Like, can we truly appreciate that?
But I also think some of what you're saying is it's as simple as the absolute nuts and bolts. Like Pearl Jam 10 sounds like it was hung over from the 80s from a
Yeah.
production standpoint.
Yeah.
And to some degree, so does Bad Motorfinger.
Oh yeah.
Some of the
Oh yeah. Without
first
a doubt.
records that sound truly 90s. I don't know how Alice in Chains did it with Dirt, but that one sounds truly
Yeah.
90s. By
But
the time they do
facelift is laced with 80s sounding stuff.
oh, so 80s.
Yeah.
So
Well, it was
80s.
recorded in the 80s, I'm pretty sure, but
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure a lot of Pearl Jam 10 was too, and
right.
that band got their sea legs as a rock band in the 80s for the most part, as part of Mother Love Bone. So
Right.
um and by the time Versus shows up, by the time Vitalogy shows up with Not For You and some of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Yeah.
like it was almost too late, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. But
Not for us.
right. And that's, I think one of the interesting things about Nirvana in that context is Nirvana is like the one that I do think somebody could go back and listen to Bleach even. Um, but even, as much as some people will criticize Nevermind, and Kurt certainly loved to criticize Nevermind for being overproduced, but like, that was because they necessarily leaned more punk than anybody else. I think it's easier for people today to look at Nirvana and say, okay, I understand how that was counterculture at the time, more so than maybe Pearl Jam. But like, as somebody who lived through it, man, I can tell you, like, Pearl Jam was as intense as it got. Like, that was, I don't want to use the word counterculture because they were the biggest band in the world then very quickly, but like, they were mysterious, they were, dark and edgy, and I don't know if that necessarily carries through still today. And there's so many 70s bands that I think we don't fully understand the context of what that must have been like at that time.
What I don't think translates for people who weren't there is the sound of authenticity. And it wasn't just grunge.
Right.
It was 9 Inch Nails too.
Oh yeah.
But the sound of authenticity in the lyrics, in the singing, versus what we saw. I was a big Poison fan. I was a big fan of Bon Jovi. I was 9 years old, so like I'm forgiving myself for it.
Yeah.
But I was a big fan of those bands. And then once I heard Guns N' Roses, I was like, oh, these guys mean it more.
Yeah.
Um,
That was
and the
such a light
natural
bulb band for
extension
us. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the natural extension from Guns N' Roses, who really meant it, who were dirty, who were dangerous, who
Hmm.
were problematic,
Yeah.
versus pretending to be all those things,
Hmm.
was more of the emo. And I think part of the authenticity of grunge was their willingness to be authentic, their willingness to be vulnerable. And there
Hmm.
was a vulnerability in the lyrics and in the singing, in the style. Somehow there was a vulnerability in the style of Pearl
Well,
Jam 10 that was like nothing we had heard before.
and if you want to know how we can prove that it was authenticity, is the fact of the just wreckage that era left behind in terms of dead band members,
Oh my
or
God.
you know the I mean, the price that all those artists paid was so heavy, and it's like there was no faking that. They were telling you it in their lyrics, and then we sit there afterwards like, wow, I can't believe it's like, oh, they were telling us like this whole time. They were telling us like, they weren't in a good place, and
Lane Staley made nothing up.
yeah, Chris Cornell, as much as I wrote about when I was writing for Waiting for Next Year, when Chris Cornell died, and I wrote an article and I said, it was surprising to us that, like, it was incomprehensible to us that he would, commit suicide. But we sit there and look back and you just read the lyrics of Super Unknown. Like, he's like,
We just
oh,
thought that he had survived and gotten out the other side.
yeah, that's really was. But like you said, like, we've lost so many people, not just singers. I mean, we've lost guitarists, we've lost drummers, we've lost bass players, like,
Yeah, his name escapes me, but the not only Lane Staley from the side
Mike
project Mad Season, but it was the bass player who
Baker Saunders,
yeah, who met up with McCready in
Barrett
rehab.
Martin. Yeah, like you had that situation. um Mike Starr, bass player for Alice in Chains, he died. You know, we just lost Taylor Hawkins, who was around in that era. Like, not, he wasn't playing in those Seattle bands, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, that era just left a wake of destruction behind it, and it always makes me feel a little bit guilty. It's like, I mythologize so many of these bands and artists, and it's like, man, like, at the same time, like, there was a lot of like real cost to those artists. But again, like you said, that's because it was authentic, and these were people that this was what they had, was music. Like, they just poured everything of themselves into that music, and you couldn't.
And it's almost funny that it got shorthanded by fashion. It
Yeah.
was like because we experienced the 80s, we tried to nail it down to Doc Martens and flannel. But
Hmm.
that just wasn't it. That was never it.
Yeah.
And they went on to prove it in the most unfortunate of all ways.
Yeah. And then I wonder too, like, sort of how you feel about, is there a difference between 90s bands today that are still actively making music? Like, do new albums from those bands really matter in the music landscape at large, or is there like value in just being a legacy artist who's like just goes out and, like, I'm always thinking, like, if like, not that they were there might have even been more 2000s. I was gonna say like Fuel, or trying to think of like well, even like a Candlebox. Like, Candlebox isn't making necessarily relevant music, but they go out on tour. Like, is there much of a difference between those two things? Like, what is the music landscape's appetite for new music from 90s bands today?
Uh, the answer is no.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, you and I are both excited for what Pearl Jam's about to release, but they're the exception, not the rule. Like,
Yeah.
if live releases a new album tomorrow, and I don't like live anyway, but
Hmm.
like if I go see them live, and I hate that I've become this guy
Hmm.
in my 40s now that I'm 45, but like if I go see live, I just want to hear I Alone. Like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
That's the way it is. When I did go see, on my birthday, not this past year. I'm born in February, but a year ago this February, we went and saw Bush at the
Hmm.
Roxino because it happened on my birthday and we thought it would be fun.
Yeah,
And it was really good. It was really fun, but I didn't need to hear any of their new metal songs,
right.
new metal songs. Just play Come Down. Just play Machine Head, okay?
There's a like, and there are like, I would imagine there would be a pretty big appetite still for a band like Jane's Addiction to go see Jane's Addiction live. But does anybody want a new Jane's Addiction album?
Except I remember 2 years ago when Smashing Pumpkins and Jane's Addiction played Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse in Cleveland on Halloween, and they couldn't sell the tickets. They were on Groupon.
Oh, really? Well, maybe not then.
Yup.
Maybe people don't care
They're
at all.
playing a venue too big.
Yeah, like apparently. Or how about, you talked about Rage Against the Machine, like even something like that. Like it sure doesn't sound like they're ever gonna actually do anything as a band again. But
Yes, they will, and I will go, and they will absolutely play again. It's just when Zach feels like it.
yeah. But can you imagine them making a new Rage Against the Machine album today?
They could, and it would sell, and it would be vital, and it would be important.
Because Tom Morello is that good?
But they're the exception. They're the
Yeah,
exception. Like I think of System of a Down. I'm not sure that they could put out a record that anybody would care
yeah.
about. But even the newer bands that broke in the early 2000s, like Slipknot. Does anybody care about a new Slipknot record? But they're headlining festivals all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. What about Nine Inch Nails? Where do they fall in this? Like, would you be
Nobody cares about their
excited?
new material.
Yeah, because I say like it
No.
seems like anything that they've put out, new recently, which they've done like a lot of like smaller releases. They did those like the 3 EPs that you can kind of combine to make one album if you want to, but I don't feel like there was a lot of appetite out there for it. But I'll tell you what, I would in a heartbeat go see Nine Inch Nails live tomorrow again. Like
And
they're
I did see them. I saw them at the Louder Than Life Festival 2 years ago, and it wasn't. They were a little bit older.
yeah.
Their age showed, but it was
Yeah.
awesome.
You know who's a
It was
band that
awesome.
is technically a 90s band? They're more thought of as a 2000s band, but they are technically a 90s band that I would argue is still pretty vital today. Is Queens of the Stone Age. People still notice, not maybe not like in the big like pop size scope of things, but in the rock world, if you have any interest in rock music,
They're in
when
the Deftones realm. They're in the Deftones
yes,
realm.
yes, yeah, that's another band that absolutely. And Deftones are a pure 90s band because I mean Adrenaline came out in 94, 95.
Four,
Yeah,
94, 95. But they are still making absolutely pure vital music because they
Deftones are
never
a
got too big.
Deftones are a freak band, man. To put out that many
Yep.
albums that still each one sounds slightly different, but still uniquely Deftones. And yeah, I'm excited anytime Deftones want to put out new music. I'm there for it.
And not all their records are great.
No, no,
We've
I'm not
talked
saying
about
that,
this.
but you
But
certainly
they
want to
they
hear
still
it.
put out vital music every single time they seem to put out music. And
I know who we're
and
forgetting.
Crosses too. Crosses puts out great music as well.
You know who we're
Go
forgetting
ahead.
that's still absolutely vital and is Radiohead. Like, but is Radiohead a band? I
No, the Smile is a band, and the Smile
the,
record, hot take, sucked. It wasn't good.
I
Sorry.
I struggled to really get into it. Like, and I desperately
I
wanted
bet
to
they're
love
great
that
live though.
album. Oh, for sure. But look, if Radiohead said, you know what, we're putting out an album next year, the music
By the
world
way,
is
I
going to
really wish
notice
I
and
hadn't
care.
said it like that. I was trying to be a bit of a shock jock. I didn't love it. I wanted to love that record. I didn't love
Yeah,
it, and
yeah,
I'm not mad about it, but I'm kind of disappointed.
yeah. It's just not something I'm going to be listening to. Probably even 6 months from now. Even right now, like I haven't listened to it probably since the week after it came out. It was probably the last time I gave that
Yeah,
a listen. So, but and Radiohead could do both sides of it. Radiohead can sell out any place they want, still to this day. And they're a weird band because while they do have a lot of older fans, they actually have tons of younger fans as well. Like they have two eras. They're a little bit like Metallica. Metallica is another one too that people still notice when they put out new music. They're definitely not they're not even a 90s band. They're an 80s band that is still doing it somehow. But
for a lot of people, they are a 90s band.
That's right. And that's what I was saying.
For me, Metallica was not an 80s band at all.
Right.
Other than one, I don't care about Metallica in the 80s.
So I retroactively love those albums now, but I certainly at the when I was first discovering them, those albums, it was like, oh, they had other albums before the Black Album, like that kind of thing. But so we kind of are the example of the people who view Radiohead as a 2000s band, like the ones who are more into In Rainbows or Hail to the Thief, that the people that think that those are like the quintessential Radiohead. And, we grew up, we're like, no, man, like it's OK Computer and, Kid A, like those are the things. And there's people
and
like
hearing
Pablo Honey
and hearing the
Bends
and hearing the development on the Bends and hearing the bits and of the Bends that would become OK Computer and seeing that development, because man, you want to talk about a curve that goes like very smoothly all the way up. That's one.
You can always listen to a Radiohead album and like pick out the one song that you're like, okay, that's where they figured out where they were going next. There's a lot of that where you can sort of hear that chain from one album to the next. Yeah.
All right. And that is where we're going to stop. We are going to do a Radiohead episode where we're going to talk about the beginning. We're just going to do a deep dive into Radiohead one of these days.
Yeah, for sure.
But dude, this was a blast, man.
Yeah,
as always. Thanks for chatting up all this stuff with me.
Yeah, I love it when we like come into it with like just like a loose idea of what we're going to talk about, and then the conversation just goes wherever it's going to go. So it was fun.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks so much for listening. If you made it this far, please go ahead and subscribe on our Substack, albumofrecord.com. We're going to be doing bonus chats from time to time there for you guys. This episode went a little bit long, so I don't know if we're going to do one this time, but love that you're along for the ride with us. We're just doing this because we want to have a good time, but we hope you guys dig it too. So thanks so much for listening.
And if you do, and you know somebody else who likes music, tell your friend, please.
Absolutely. All right. It's been the Album of Record podcast.